everyone, welcome to At Any Cost Metz 1870. This is a end of Napoleonic era war game. This is put out by GMT Games and it's designed by Herman Luttman. So great combination of things that come together to bring us a really good game. I had some units that were laid out. I was playing with the game, fiddling around, and I thought, let's go ahead and talk about my experience with the game so far. I first got the game, I did an unboxing, and my thoughts were, this is going to be a complicated game to learn. And it actually turns out it is so easy. There's some details in a few of the steps that you play, but overall it's really easy. Basically, it's a chit-driven game. You draw a chit, it activates a unit or a random event. You do all of your actions with that unit, draw the next chit. Once all the chits have been resolved, you go to the end turn phase and then determine if there's a victor. If there's no victor, you then start the next turn, reset your chit pool, and begin again. So easy. And then combat's not very complicated. Combat runs on a couple of dice. We'll cover some details, and I can see now after playing it, there's a chart on Board Game Geek where someone took and made I think like a miniature bell curve combat chart, because this one die is so random, it can be infuriating. But with a little bell curve, you get a more consistent battle result. So, that's not part of the game. That's just an option someone came up with. So I just thought I'd mention that real quick before I forget. So basically, you go through your actions with all the units, all the chits. If you're playing a short game, it goes through rather quickly. If you're playing a long game, you might have quite a few turns, and then a campaign has an overnight turn and the next day. You have a lot of options. So speaking of options, 2 short scenarios, 2 long scenarios, and then like a campaign scenario which has a couple of big battles. I would recommend start out with a short scenario. Short scenario. I have a card for that. Just grabbing the card here real quick. So a short scenario is real simple here. It's got some of your victory conditions listed and then some reminders on your scenario details like the turn length, where the map edge is. There's no plan chit. Only 5 event chits, and you use 3 into the cup. And then this French second cav, they activate when the first reserve goes. Easy. Now the rest of the details for your scenario are going to come from the playbook. And in this particular playbook, right away the first scenario listed, if I could get this to open, is Afternoon Crisis. It's short. It goes from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. listed in here somewhere. It starts on the 4 and it ends on 8. Yeah, it says up here 4 to 8 p.m. It's like 5 turns. It's rather short, but this gives you a really good sneak peek at most of the rules. Most of the rules are covered in that short scenario. And I say most because the setup is a little bit different than a full game. So let's talk about that a little bit. Setup mostly includes putting together your chit bag. And I've got some chits in here, and I had a couple out here. So what's a chit? Well, you have a couple types. You have your unit chits. I'm trying to get that to focus. So when you draw this, I would activate the French Reserve, or I could activate the Prussian 5th Cavalry, for example, or I might have the French Commander-in-Chief chit, Marshal Bazaine. And the first scenario actually tells you specifically which random event chits to put in. So that Commander-in-Chief chit, the Prussians have one as well. Then the rest of the chits are random event chits. So let's take a look at a random event chit. I'm saying chit with a ch. Random event chit. I know some of you guys will be like, what are you saying? Chit. Depending on the result, you might think it's a different word. Oh, that's a bunch of chit. So panic test is an example of a random event. Trying to get that to focus for you. Or you might have this side. You could play this side. Now what that means is when you draw your event chit, you decide, do I want to play it for this random event, like I want to do a panic test? And each of these battle cards has in detail what the random events do. So here's the Russian and here's the French. There are 11 of these random event chits. And when you play the short scenario, it tells you specifically to draw. There's like 5 of them they want you to draw specifically. And you're going to make that the pool of your chit bag. Oh, I just knocked a bunch of my troops over. So anyway, I'm going to put my commander in chit for both sides. I put all of the units according to the book. I put in the chit for the reinforcement unit. I would drop that in there. And then of those 5 specific chits it tells me to use for events, I randomly pick 3 of those and toss those in here as well. So I actually would end up with a couple chits left over. So the idea is by randomly selecting, you don't even look at the ones that are left out because you don't want to know what's in your bag. So that's how you create the pool for the basic game. So that's laid out for you. Also in the basic game, it tells you where to put your troops. It says which ones are marked with low ammo, because that's a, hey, guess what? It's a chit. And tells you which ones would be marked with battle worn. That means they're flipped. Now, I am missing some chits because I have done some movement and some combat. And I thought, you know, hey, let's talk about gameplay here as I am kind of fiddling through here and playing the game. So this is set up for that first scenario, and I've gone through this particular playthrough. I've completed the first turn, and I think I've probably bumped and moved some other stuff around to experiment with rules, but the first scenario is really easy to set up. So once you have your scenario set up, troops are laid out, your chit bag is made, we can start to play, and that's actually pretty easy. So we have here a sequence of play. So first is the planning phase. In a full-length game, not the short one, but one that uses all of the chits, there are 11 random event chits for each nation. You are going to play with all of those. You randomly pick, well, first you get to pick one that you want. So of those 11, you get to pick one that you really, really want. Maybe you want an opportunity fire chit, for example. So you're going to set that and toss that into your random bag. Then of the 10 remaining chits, you randomly pick 5 of those and stick it in your bag. And it might also tell you to pick this one here, the Fortune of War chit, and grab that. Boom. And of course it might tell you to grab the Commander-in-Chief chit that I mentioned. Alright, so let's talk about, we won't cover every single chit in detail because that's a lot. That's why you can read the rules. But let's just say you draw, for example, the Fortune of War. This one's unique enough that we can talk about. It has a enhanced side and it has a degrade side. What that means is the next chit you draw will either have a benefit or some kind of penalty. And because you don't know what chit is coming up next, hopefully, unless this is second to last, you don't know always if it's going to be a random event or a unit, French or Prussian. So this Fortunes of War, the fortunes could be good or the fortunes could be bad. Come on, focus. Yeah. All right. You might draw the Commander-in-Chief chit. Now there's a Prussian one and a French. This is the French. And again, I won't go over all the details, but essentially what the French one says is you can activate a French division immediately, and it gets to do something. And, you know, good, bad, it depends. It might throw off your strategy. The Prussian one you draw it, and you still get to activate a unit, but you get to choose when. So the French, you had to play this immediately. The Prussian player, you get to decide when to do that. Well, why is that a thing? Why is it even important to know? So what I want to do for a moment is segue to the story of the game, if you will. Now, please remember, I'm an amateur historian. Let me read you the paragraph here of the rules. It's the introduction. So if you want, close your eyes, enjoy. On the morning of August 16th, 1870, at the Gravelet crossroads outside of Fortress Metz, Napoleon III, Emperor of the French Second Empire, turned over command of the Army of the Rhine to a reluctant Marshal Francois Achille Bazaine. The Army of the Rhine, the last intact field army, and already the last hope for France during this 2-week-old Franco-Prussian War, was gathered around the protection of the Metz fortress complex. The Prussian First and Second Armies were sweeping forward, hot on the heels of the retiring French. But poor weather and a disorganized cavalry screen followed the French army to break contact with the pursuing Prussians. Helmuth von Moltke, chief of the Prussian General Staff, instructed his armies to wheel south of the fortress, across the Moselle River, and attempt to catch the French in the flank. The only problem with this plan was, where were the French? The resulting 2-day campaign produced some of the more remarkable battles in military history. The battles of Mar-la-Tour and Gravelet-Saint-Privat. These 2 battles produced over 60,000 casualties, with each army suffering equally. So, other than pronouncing those locations wrong, sorry if that ruins the immersion, that's what we have here. This is representing some of the most history-shaping battles that took place. I learned this from the designer notes at the back of the playbook. This tells me why the commander-in-chief chit for the French works the way it does, and why that Marshal Bazaine guy wasn't necessarily the best choice for the French in this battle. And what's neat, those mechanics are baked into these random event chits. It's fantastic. And that commander-in-chief chit. So what we have here then is, when this is all said and done, the Prussians, as I've learned, this is kind of what united and made a united Germany. So at the time, Germany had Prussia and I think like Bavaria and Austria. They were own like nation states. And this victory over the French also put it into like Imperial France. They got rid of the Napoleon, the emperor guy at some point. And so that's history changing. If the French had won, we might not have seen World War I the way that we did, if it occurred at all. Because according to my little history reading, the Prussian German Empire at that point was able to take some land that belonged to other people, and those people wanted that land back. So that led to some history-changing events. So this is an important battle. Also, not only from the historical standpoint, but technology standpoint. This is an amazing transition, I say, from like maybe old technology to newer technology. Again, this is on the heels of World War I. World War I wouldn't occur for maybe another 44 years or so, but you know, you got to think, technology changed very slowly back in those days. After the revolutionary industrial periods, which were beginning to happen, maybe towards the later part of the 20th century, technology moved very slowly. This, we're seeing the beginning of the first primitive machine guns. We see that the French had a very powerful rifle that they used. The Prussians brought very powerful, accurate artillery to the battle, so they outgunned the French in artillery, but the French infantrymen outgunned the Prussian infantry person. And so this saw a clash of technology and ideologies that led to the shaping of our world. Wow. And it's all here. And again, all of that is baked into some very, very easygoing rules. Let's look at a combat chart real quick. So combat ranges are not on your counters. They're over here, for example, on a fire combat chart. And that tells me Prussian infantry, their hexes, they're effective at 1. and their extended range is 2. You get like a 50% strength point penalty at a range of 2. Prussian artillery, though, can shoot all the way out to 8 hexes, whereas French infantry can shoot riflemen out to 4. That's double the range of the Prussians. And the French artillery only goes out to 6, but it's slightly outgunned by Prussian artillery. French machine gun, because I don't know how to pronounce it, French mitrailleuse, goes out to 4, so it's on par with the French infantryman. And the rules are set to where that machine gun and the infantry fire together as a group. Devastating, devastating. And that's what the Prussians ran into, was devastating French infantry power, if you will. So what do we do with that knowledge? We understand, we set up the game according to the scenario. We have our chit bag drawn. We've got units out, they can move. How do we put that into motion? Well, that's easy. The game setup is really easy. Before I show you the chart, in essence, it's you draw a chit, activate the unit, or perform the random event, complete that action, draw another chit, complete the action, go through all of the chits, and you go through an intern section. So easy. Looking here, though, at the sequence of play, just to give it some structure, again, very simple. There's the planning phase. How detailed do we talk about this? We'll get in here to some details. So the planning phase. In a full game, that's where you're going to take that large selection of random event chits. You're going to pick one as the commander of your nation, and it's one you want. Like opportunity fire, you want that, so you throw it in your bag or your cup. Then, of the 10 remaining random event chits, you would then take 5 of those randomly and throw those into your bag or cup. And then the remaining ones are set off to the side, and they're not going to be used this turn. They'll come again when you hit the planning phase again. So each turn, potentially, you're going to have different events that could happen. In the very first scenario that we're doing, it tells you specifically which chits you're going to use. And that first base game there's 5 specific chits for each nation. So what you do is you're going to draw only 3 of those 5. So in a full game, you get all the chits that could possibly be used, and you get a larger selection of them. In the short game, it's 3 out of 5, and it tells you specifically which 5 you're going to pull from each turn. Then you throw in your commander-in-chief chit, the one that says the French get to do something awesome, or the Prussians get to do something more awesome. And then you throw in all of the units that are going to be in the battle, and anybody that's going to come in randomly. So you could, this is for the starting game. That's a lot of chits. This is the part that I think some people, depending on your playstyle, don't like. There's a lot of randomness. I love randomness. I like not knowing what could or is going to happen. So I'm okay with that. All right, so that's the first thing you do. You create the chit pool, if you will. Then we do a chit draw. All right, easy. I will demonstrate. Randomly pick. Oh, I drew. Krupp's guns. Hello, focus. Let's say I don't have those memorized and I wanted to know what that was. So what I do is, that's the light gray. That is a Prussian event chit. And I look, here's Krupp's guns, and it says I can play immediately or hold, meaning I could use it later. I could save it for another action where this would benefit, because it says any one Prussian artillery unit may issue opportunity fire at any eligible time during the turn. That's why I could hold on to it. Maybe nobody is currently doing opportunity fire because I just drew a chit, so I'm going to hold on to it. Artillery charge option. So with any Krupp's guns chit application, the Prussian player may instead move the chosen artillery unit up to half its movement allowance, and then issue the fire combat with half its SPs, or vice versa. Because normally you can't do that with artillery. Horse drawn artillery, yeah, but regular artillery you normally cannot move and shoot it. So that might be something you say, yep, I'm going to hold on to that. Great. That action has been resolved. Alright, that went quick. I'm the Prussian player starting the game. I'm going to hold on to that. So then we draw the next chit. It is La Bouffe, 3rd Division of the French. Great. So now I'm doing a unit activation. Where's my pointer? I'll look at my counters, and I've moved these around a little bit already, so this is not the initial starting part, but here is the commander, La Bouffe of the 3rd Division. And what does he do? Well, I'm going to move somebody out here for just a second. Well, the first thing your commander has to do is decide what posture does he want to do. Does he want to be aggressive or does he want to be defensive? Because you get different actions based on aggressive or defensive. So for example, you can either posture, you can move or fire, either one. But on aggressive, that will let you assault to initiate like the melee close range combat. Or if you're a defensive posture, you could build earthworks, defenses, or even do like recovery or rally options. So that's what you have to decide. Based on your current battlefield situation, what's my posture? In a situation like this, I might say, I'm going to be aggressive. We need to move our troops south because we have towns to capture. All right, I've made that decision. But now I have to decide who can participate. Well, La Bouffe has I just dropped it. Oh man, I'm just making a mess here. He's got a command range. So he's got 2 in a box. That means that's his radius. This 4 is how far he can move. This A means I'm going to have him on aggressive, or the D on defensive posture. And you'll notice that this range changes. So when he's on the defense for the Bouffe, he can command things out to 3 hexes away. If he's aggressive, he can command things out to 2 hexes away. And that changes for each commander. Now I say hex, that's a little misleading. It's not necessarily a hex. Think of it like movement points. He can affect up to 2 movement points away. Right? So let's say I've got him right smack dab down there. These hexes under me are on little roads and they're clear. And it's like 1 movement point. Well, here's a stream. So I would have to say 2 movement points would get me here to the road and might not reach into the stream hex because I don't know which side of the stream they're on. Well, they're in there, but if I was going to go in there to give orders, I might not be able to send orders into the stream hex because it takes like 2 movement points. Okay, so this group might be out of command. This group here is in command. 2. All right, well, I got 2. Well, I got to cross the river. This guy out here, he's really out of command. And I tell you, when I first was reading that about road movement, forests, and how all of those things affect your ability to give orders, I didn't understand that. In my mind, I'm thinking, why? And then it hit me. Oh, because these are runners. They have to send people out to deliver the orders, the couriers, the people by letter, and the horses and whatnot. So that made sense at that point. So that's why it's not strictly just 2 hexes, it's 2 movement points worth of hexes away. So let's say, for grins and giggles, this guy is out of command. So what you want to do is once you determine someone's out of command, you're going to draw a random out of command marker. The backside of these command markers have an order, cautious, move, for example. But you're not supposed to know what that is. So you draw it randomly, make sure you stick it down on the out of command unit so that all you see is out of command. Then you proceed through your turn phase. And where did I put that? Right there. So now you've activated your headquarter, you've set him to his posture, you've determined who's in command, who's out of command. Then you have to decide who's going to participate in fire combat, and you resolve fire combat. Then you decide who's going to move, and then you do all the movement. They normally cannot fire and move. It's like, well, which one do you want to do? I'm going to do all the fire, all the move. There might be some events or special rules that will let you do both, but generally it's you do one thing with these folks, and then you move with the other people. Or you don't fire, you don't move, but you're saving people to do the assault. So essentially, they don't normally do more than one action. Like I said, some examples like that chit let you move and then fire, or vice versa it said. Or horse artillery, they can shoot and move, so they would shoot at half their strength power and then move at half their movement. And then finally, if you have nobody doing those, if you were on the defensive posture, you could then do rally. And then if you were out of command, after everybody who was in command does something, your out of command people activate. So the out of command, they would then just grab their chit, flip it over, and go, oh, that cavalry unit guy was set for cautious. So I'm going to put that chit back in the draw pool. And I actually have here what the out of commands are. So we knew that he drew cautious. It says here, if he's cavalry, he gets to half move and then may engage, charge, or assault combat. So they might not be under the direct command of their division commander all the time, but they do have their own leaders within those brigades. Easy. All right, that's basically how the game goes. And then once all of the chits have been drawn and activated, there's an end turn. Some of your scenarios will have things that you need to check as far as end turn events that you would check for to see if those events trigger, or you might start checking for your victory conditions. But let's say you're playing the short scenario that doesn't have any special event conditions to fulfill, but you go through excuse me, you go through all of your chits and then you clean up. Basically, you're going to take off all of the various markers that you don't need. Low ammo you would keep because you have to recover that during a rally step. But like you would put all of your chits off to the side and you start a new turn. I mean, it's that easy. Like I said, all the activation and event chits are returned to the owning player. That includes unused chits. Since I solo play, it just all goes back into a pile. And then you're ready to move on. Now, one thing I didn't mention, in your longer games, when you have casualties, I'll show you the rule book. There's a spot on the map that you can't see where you put eliminated and units eligible for rebuilding. In the short scenario, basically what you would do is you put your eliminated folks, and then excuse me, if your scenario allows it, the intern, you would move those units back to eligible for rebuilding, and then there's rules to see when and if they get to come back. And there's also some units that, detachments, if you take a brigade, and there's rules on how to break these down into detachments, detachments don't get to rebuild. So you rebuild brigades. So speaking of detachments, I won't cover that too much because that to me is kind of a player decision. Essentially, what you can do during your turn is you could take a full strength brigade, for example, let's say Mr. LeBouf's this guy. I could break it down to 6 points worth of strength point. That's like their firepower, their ability to wage war. And I could break that down into 2 detachments as long as it adds up to a 6. So for example, if these were the same unit, they're not, but I'm just saying for example, I could have one at 4 and one of these at 2. That way they add up to 6, but now I've got, instead of 1 counter, I have 2. And the reason I don't spend a lot of time talking about that aspect of the game is it's really a situational decision. Do I want to split and maybe take advantage of capturing 2 objectives, or splitting fire, or whatever you think is best at the time. But you do have that as an option. You can split your troops. I don't even know where that came from. There was just a thought. I was like, oh, hey, let's talk about your detachments. Oh, that's why, because you can't rebuild your detachments. All right, so once you've gone through your entire turn sequence, now if you're playing a campaign, there's a night phase. The short mission is only 5 hours long, so it doesn't have a night phase. So there are some additional aspects of the game that you would not be using in your short scenario. But let's take a look at some of the actions. combat. Combat actually really is not that bad to do. Now, let's say for combat, I'm going to have cavalry here in the open. I'm going to have, say, a stack of dudes right there. Pretty close. Let's focus on that side of the battle. As I try to zoom in. I'll move this back a little bit. Alright, so we've zoomed in on this battle. And let's say I drew LeBouf to go first. And he is going to, he gets activated because let's say LeBouf command unit is right next to him, so he's in command. He's ready to rock and roll. So what I do is I look at my stack and I see, what do we have? I have an artillery unit. I have a mitrailleur. Now I know that this is the mitrailleur machine gun because it has an M next to its strength. This is kind of unique. This is one of those devil is in the details to try and remember. It's part of the artillery, and certain actions will share with the mitrailleurs, like damage potential, but things like low ammo markers, that is separate for the artillery and separate for the mitrailleur. Plus, when you're adding up strength points to determine your firepower, you add the mitrailleur to infantry, but you don't add it to the artillery because it's a different type of weapon. Cavalry would be the same. You're adding like and like together to get a firepower. So our cavalry add together, infantry add together. And even then there's some stacking limits. If you have fresh brigades, you can only have one fresh brigade in a hex. But you can have like a whole bunch of commanders and artillery and things that aren't fresh brigades in a hex. So again, devil in the details when it comes to moving where you put people, and that's an important part of combat because I need to know who shoots together to give me a firepower result. Alright, well now that I've got some people here, what do I do with the numbers? Well, here this artillery has a 2 and a 3. The 2 is the firepower, the 3 is the movement, and the 6, I think of that as kind of like their resilience, their toughness, and that helps to reflect how much damage they can absorb, right, when you make some morale rolls essentially. And the cavalry are the same way. They have 2 numbers. They have their firepower or strength points. They have a 7 for movement. So 7, they're very nimble. Plus cavalry also have categories of cavalryness. There's heavy cavalry, light cavalry, medium cavalry, and that gives certain bonuses when they do their charges into battle. Well, the red French, they're going to fire. Well, since I know that artillery is not the same as these guns, I'm going to fire him separately. So what I do is I'll take his firepower. I'm going to roll a couple of dice. Now, when you look at the strength points, there's a chart here before I roll dice. But you can look to see if there's any not shifts, but any, where was it? Any effects to the strength point. I thought I had a nice little list of strength point modifiers. There's like range is one item. Like if you're artillery and it's 1 hex away, that's canister range, and you do 150% extra strength point. If you're extended range, it's half of your strength point. Plus, it can be modified if you're shaken. That would subtract 1 from your strength point. Or if I was disrupted, excuse me, that's -2 from my strength point. So if this artillery was disrupted, -2, and he only has 2 strength points, he wouldn't be able to shoot. But let's say he's fresh. So he's still at a 2. Yeah, so this is just checking for range. There's not a whole lot that modifies the strength points. But again, you would just want to make sure that you've accounted for those potential modifiers. Well, then you roll your dice. Now they've included 4 dice. So you have a red die that I use when I roll the French, and a gray die for the Prussians. It doesn't really matter, but let's just say it's the French firing. So I'm going to roll my 2 dice. Wow. Alright, I hope that landed on camera, but I'll move it over. So they rolled, this is their firepower number, and this is their morale number. So for those who don't know, which I'll explain, that's a really good roll. That's fantastic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my chart. Now, the strength points, where does that come in? That gives me a column, which if I take, I'm trying to make this fit. Here you go. It gives me a column that I'm going to roll on. Now, I know that that base artillery with no modifiers is strength points of 2. But here's where a whole bunch of shifts are according to the firepower. So is it Prussian artillery? Because remember, the Prussians had better artillery. Nope. Is it French infantry and the mitrailleuse? Well, yes it is. And that's the special French thing right there. And so we have, well, this is just regular cavalry. Sorry, that's regular artillery. It's not them yet. So I wouldn't do a column shift yet. Are they low ammo? Nope. Are they on rationed ammo? Nope. Is this artillery plunging fire? Are they firing down on a target? Nope. Is there obscure line of sight? See, that's something else, right? Because you're like, well, how do I know I can shoot? What's my line of sight? Line of sight rules are actually pretty simple. So just to briefly show you, I'm here in this clearly defined, like, canyon, I guess, ravine, something. I have hills here, all around. And he came charging up over these hills, came down the hill, and is making a charge towards the French. Well, there's nothing between them. They're not obscured. I'm not in a forest hex or anything like that. Some of that stuff could obscure. But the line of sight is pretty easy because if you are, say, here, let's say there was no forest here, this guy could shoot down here because the rules say that the hills are very gently sloping, so there's not a whole lot of the, you know, where if there's one hex of same height stuff that automatically blocks. It's saying, well, it slopes down. Well, you can't see that this is a down gesture, but it like goes down, and so he probably could see down here. But in this case, there's forest in the way, so he can't see. And it has some examples in the rule book about if this person's at this height and your opponent is at this height, what's in between them, is that obscured? So like if I was, say, here in a forest and there's a forest and I'm here, this could either be block, because it's in there, but let's say I was one more level up. So just raise him up. This forest I now see over, but it's now obscuring, right? So it has, again, devils in the details. I was never very good at line of sight in games, but this one is a little more friendly and it's forgiving. So as long as you and your opponent could come to an agreement on, you know, what seems realistic on the idea of gentle slopes, nothing here is like a canyon. None of the land goes completely flat and then drops. Everything is nice and gentle. But in this case, we have excellent line of sight to our target. So I have my 2. I have, let's say, no column shifts. So I look at the 8 that I rolled and come across here to the 2, and it says it's a morale test. I'm going to roll a morale test. Well, that's not too bad, because now what I do is I look here at my morale roll, and what I do is I take a look at this person's what do we call it, like resilience number, and we subtract that from the die roll. And then right here it tells you if it's a difference of less than 1 or equal to -1, there's no effect. So for example, if I had rolled a 3 and I subtract that 7 from a 3, that's -4. That means the shot hit in the hex but no effect. But because I rolled a 10 and their resilience, if you will, is a 7, that's the 0 to +3. That means they take 1 morale hit. Now, the game explains morale. I think it was a little confusing at first, but if you think about it and just try to simplify it, it's really not that bad. Essentially, what you have is, I'm going to show you a, well, you got these disrupted and shaken markers. Disruption is the lowest form of morale damage that a person could take. So that horse unit from just that artillery took 1 hit. So he's got -1 strength point and -1 toughness. This is number here, that 7, that's TCR. That's like their toughness combat readiness number. And he would have a -1 to that. So when these guys shoot next, he's rolling with a 6 toughness instead of 7. Then let's say you took another hit. Well, that would be flipping this to the disrupted side. Let's say he takes a third hit. Now he's going to flip this to the battle-worn side. Still not necessarily anybody dead, but they're weakening. And then let's say he takes another morale hit. Well, at that point, you now start rolling for potential losses, right? Oh, my goodness. Which would then be another, like a casualty morale test. Which is tough, okay? Let's do this. Before we do that, what we're going to do is flip this back and kind of continue the shooting and show you how this guy degrades. So first, this artillery fired. Now we're going to have these guys shoot. Now remember, there's a rule that lets the French and that machine gun artillery shoot together. So they're going to have a total of 4 and 5 firepower. Their effective range is French infantry is out to 2 hexes, and that machine gun is out to 2 hexes. That's 2 hexes away, so they're fine. No penalties to their strength points. All right, great. So then we're going to take a look here. That puts them at 9 firepower. That puts them on the 9 chart. But it says here French infantry and that mitrailleur gets a 1 shift to the right. So the more you go to the right, the more damage that this chart reflects. So I'm 8, 9 right now, but I'm actually going to be rolling on the 10 to 11. We're not low ammo, we're not rationed ammo, we're not plunging artillery, there's no obscure line of sight, there's not multiple defensive fires, there's none of these events, there's nothing. The guy's in the open, so there's no terrain benefits. But, check it out, plus 50% strength points if the target is cavalry. Because see, that's under target. Well, yes they are. That's 3 shifts. So my infantry and my little machine gun is shooting into all these horses. So I'm going from the 9 to the 10 column because it's that French machine gun bonus. 1, 2, 3 for shooting at cavalry. I'm rolling on this chart, greater than 16 or equal to. I'm going to tear some stuff up. Let's roll dice. I'm probably going to knock over some counters. Well, there we go. 6 and a 5. That's not too bad. Oops, 6 and 5. So 6, run that across, all the way across to the beautiful 16. That's a casualty hit, and that is a targeted hit. Must make a morale test, and that's it. So a casualty and a morale test. Like there's some numbers. So like if I had a morale test plus 3, that means my morale test die you would add 3. But this was a casualty hit, and they're going to take a morale test. If you remember from earlier, we had already applied a shaken to this person, and our current roll was a casualty and then a morale test. Well, here's the thing. The casualty hit won't do anything against this unit because he was fresh. He hadn't been flipped to his battle-worn side. So in order for a fresh unit to make a morale test, as far as like to see if they break and run, is if they take 2 casualty hits. So I would have to roll really, really high here on the high end to take a fresh combat brigade and possibly break it on 1 combat roll. All right, so he's fine for that, but he still has to make a morale check. So what I do is I have to take that 7, subtract 1 for being shaken, so that's a 6. Then I subtract 5. So 6 minus 5 is equal to or less than 1. So, well, actually, no. 5 minus 6. Yeah, because it's a -1, right? So that would be no result. So the first artillery shot rolled really, really well, caused a morale check, which made him be shaken. Then this group rolled. They hit well enough, but they were still had the resolve to not take further morale hits. So, and I think the combat is simple. It's really not that tough because the idea is there's no just two states to a combat unit. You have to wear down their morale in order to force them to flee from combat. So this unit, if you were saying narratively, they got hit by the artillery and then dispersed in such a way that all this incoming firepower just kind of disperse them more. They didn't need to absorb it. But let's change. Let's say I rolled an 8. So now I subtract 5 and I subtract that from 8. I'm back up here to the 0 to 3 and it says it's another morale hit. Only one. But now I take that shaken and I can flip it to the -2 side. So really this unit turned out pretty good. It turned out really, really well. But let's say you are applying those extra morale hits over time. Maybe you have to apply 2 morale hits. Well, remember, you just keep flipping everything until there's nothing left to flip. So let's say at this state I had inflicted 2 morale hits. I would have to go to the disrupted side, and then I would have to flip him to the battle-worn side. And that would be applying my 2 more morale hits. But you still don't roll for any breaking or seeing if people flee the field. You would have to do that if he took more morale hits. Because remember, it's not that you probably have killed some troops in there. You're probably startling and scaring a lot of people. So it's just the morale that you're affecting. But let's say he's in this state. He's got -2 for disrupted, and he's on the battle-worn side. Well, if he takes another morale hit, that becomes a casualty hit. Or if I roll on my chart and it says, apply a casualty hit, at that point we're making a break test. And to make the break test, once you've gone through all that morale steps, you roll a die 6. So I'm going to roll it. He rolled a 1. Now I actually have here the break test. It says if the die roll is a 1, 2, or 3 greater than, here, what was it? I rolled a 1. So I'm actually going to be here. What is my math? Oh, look, since he's got -2 disrupted and he's got a 4 on the toughness, but I subtract 2. He's really sitting at a toughness of 2, and I subtract 1. So right here, I'm not good at this. Die roll 4 plus or less. Okay, it's 1. The die roll is 1 less than the modified TCR. It's called a normal pass. He remains on the battlefield. And that's amazing that I rolled a 1 for that, and he's only got a 2 toughness. If really I had rolled just about anything else, wow, if I had rolled a 2, for example, I'm trying to flip the 2 on my die. So let's say that the die roll was a 2. Equal means uneasy pass. So the unit remains battle-worn, and if shaken or disrupted, it retreats 2 hexes. Yeah, I amazingly rolled a 1, and the guy only had 2 morale points, if you will, or strength. But if I had rolled a 3 or higher, he would have failed his check, and then he would have broke. And that's when I would remove him, and I'd remove his markers, and I would stick him in the casualty box, for which at a later point he might be able to come back into the battle, depending on your scenario. I hope I explained that well. It's one of those things where it probably takes longer to explain than for you to play it. So let me just summarize. Essentially, you're going to add your firepower together, your strength points together. You then will modify based on range, potentially, modify based on if you're shaken or disrupted. So once you have a firepower to work from, I keep calling it firepower because I'm used to that, but it is strength points. So when I say firepower, I mean those strength points. So once you have your total firepower, you roll your 2 dice. You roll the die for your nation, and then you roll a morale die, both at the same time. You then cross-reference your firepower die with your final modified strength. So let's say I rolled a 4, So let's say I rolled a 4, cross-reference with 4 strength points that are firing, and that gives me a morale test. Or maybe I got to do a morale check, but there's a modifier to it. Or maybe there's a casualty. So if they're already battle-worn and they have a casualty result, they then have to make a break test. So I'm going to make a morale check. To make a morale check to see if they become shaken or disrupted, I take the unit's toughness, which is that number in the red box, and then I subtract that from the die roll here. So this guy passed no problem. But let's say I rolled 10. So 10 minus 8 would be 2. I compare that then on this chart to see potentially how many morale hits he takes. And your morale hits, again, are shaken and then disrupted, and then you can flip the unit to the battle worn, and anything beyond that is counted as a casualty hit, which you do a break test. So you roll a die, compare that to the remaining, because see, this would be flipped and he'd be disrupted. So he potentially would have a very low toughness to roll against. So technically, if this guy is disrupted and flipped to the battle worn side, he should be easy to kill. But you might say, well, then they're always easy to kill. But as you play and progress through the game, you have the option to run recovery, which means your leadership could potentially remove the disrupted from him, and if he did take more damage in combat before he could reconstitute, you know, you'd be rolling against a 5 instead of against a 3. All right, so I hope that makes sense. It makes sense to me, and it's not that complicated. It feels like there's a couple of fiddly die rolls to do, but actually as you're playing, it actually kind of flows very well. And I like it because, again, it's not a simple granularity. Well, it's a little bit of a granularity, but it's not a all or nothing. They're like, I'm not going to say other games, but a lot of games, right? It's either they're fresh and they're running and everything runs smooth, or they get hit once, you flip it, and that's broken, and their stats are terrible. This gives you a slow degradation of combat ability, and they could possibly stay on the field for a while until you break them. I like that. So combat is probably the more of the complex steps that you have, because then it gets into easy stuff. Movement, easy. Second number on the chit. So artillery, this artillery, for example, could move 3, and it's just like you would expect in any war game. You look at your movement chart. Where'd my movement chart go? Right? You look at your movement chart. You look at the terrain type. You see how many movement points it takes to enter, and you subtract that from your movement as you move through stuff, right? So let's say 2 movement points to go into the forest. Maybe there's an extra movement point to go uphill. This cavalry can go up there easy, just like any other game. Then there's the morale, and your leadership can replace morale pretty much equal to their leadership. So if he's doing a recovery for someone in range and they do 2, then you could say reduce him from disrupted to shaken, and then from shaken to fully healed, for instance. Or if he was battle worn, I'd have to look that up. I don't remember off the top of my head if you can fix battle worn people in the game. I know most of the time the recovery of morale is for disrupted and shaken. Yeah, there's some other things too, but that's the basics. That's the basics. If you play the basic game, that's what it's teaching you, is you can build some of the earthworks. There's a chance to build like little foxholes, a hasty entrenchment, and there's rules that you roll, but it could give you a bonus to your TCR potentially. Or you could build an entrenchment, and there's some rules for how you build that and how you use them. And most of the penalties you get, like low ammo, sometimes that might be a result of combat, which we didn't even talk about. If I'm shooting and I roll my dice and I roll doubles, which I didn't roll here, but if I rolled 8 and 8, that might be a really good result, but I have to give that unit low ammo. And if they roll it again, they might get a result of rationed ammo. And I could use a recovery to get rid of low ammo or rationed ammo. So what does that do? Since that's part of combat, we just got done, but I'll share that with you because that's a recovery step. If I'm rationed ammo, I get a 4-column shift on the combat chart. That's horrible because that's towards the not very effective shooting. Or the weak one, low ammo, is a column shift of 2. So again, the overall concepts are very easy for you to grasp. It's just remembering some of those little details like rolling doubles, or when you're taking command range, it's not exactly 2 hexes, it's like 2 movement points worth of hexes to see if your runners can reach other people in your base. Remembering to use all your modifiers for combat, because remember, there's shift columns, column shifts you can apply, your strength points that you can modify, and remembering things like stacking. Stacking isn't too bad, but you can't put 2 fresh, it says like infantry brigades together, because I guess that's a lot of people, but if they're battle worn they can stack. So there's little restrictions like that. Let's see what else is there. That's the bulk of it for the simple game. Now when you get into the big game, remember, then you have the sequence for like moving your eligible units for rebuilding down to units that, first from eliminated to eligible for rebuilding, and then you had to make dice rolls to see if they can come back. Just there's little additional things, but it's not overly complicated. If you can even read the rule book online. Let me show you here. That's the playbook. The rule book, like just to give you an example of some of the things that we didn't cover in detail. We mentioned your commander-in-chief chits. We've talked about your event chits, your activation chits. We didn't go in detail about the Fortune of War chit, but remember we said if you draw it, you roll a die, and you either do something good to the next chit or bad. And here's a little chart for that. We set your posture, we got your command range, we know if they're out of command, combat, like we said, you're checking your line of sight, you're firing, you're doing your strength points. Artillery mobility, see, and this is something we didn't talk about because it didn't move, but as you play, if you, see, it says most artillery units that fire in the combat step may not move in the subsequent movement step. You're going to place a artillery fired. There's actually an artillery fired marker that you could place to remind you not to move the artillery in the move segment. But if you're horse artillery, they have a reminder chit that you could. You fire at half strength, and then in the movement phase, you move half. Right? So little rules like that. And your casualty, right? Your machine gun, ammunition we talked about. Remember, if you roll doubles, you might get ammunition problem. Your morale test, that's where it gets a little complicated because there's the morale check, which you have to subtract their remaining FCR strength, or what I call resilience, versus what you rolled on your morale die, versus any modifiers you got from your combat chart. And then if they take casualties, they got to make break tests. Again, not complicated once you've done it yourself, but you just got to remember there is a process for it. And then movement is super easy. Again, your movement points, subtract that for the train. There is opportunity fire, but opportunity fire is only available if you draw the appropriate event chit. So again, that's in here. So yes, there's opportunity fire, but you got to have the event chit. And then here's some rules on charging. Charging really isn't that complicated either. And I'm not going to go through an example of a cavalry charge, but it has simple things like you got to have line of sight, you got to be able to move into there. Then it has rules for like if you break through potentially. So not only could you defeat the people in that hex, you might even break through. And then again, here's your modifiers for if it's light, medium, or heavy cavalry. So that's something to remember too, is, oh yeah, there's different weights of cavalry. Just little things that you read through and go, oh, that's right, don't forget that. There's cavalry counter charges where you might have a friendly cavalry step in the way to try and ward off the incoming enemy one. Cavalry opportunity charges. So again, there might be a chit or a requirement that you meet where you can say, oh, they're moving, so I'm going to charge. There's road march rules. So if you're marching in column, there's some rules for that. And then it talks about moving your reinforcements. So let's see here. Oh, if you're overrun, here's one. If your headquarters overrun, there's a rule where if you get somebody adjacent to your headquarters, let's say here's a French adjacent to the Prussian, they're overrun. And then there's a rule where it says you got to take your overrun headquarters and move it to the closest unit. And then you put, guess what? I've only got one of these. I must have more somewhere. But you put a headquarter overrun marker. And then there's only certain things they can do when they're overrun. And then it goes away after a while. Assault combat, okay? Assault combat, again, it's not horrible, but there's certain conditions that you meet, and then you got to make sure you put your assault combat on there, and then you can resolve assault. Probably would be infantry. Alright, and then there's rules for like retreating if you lose your assaults. Breakthrough movement we talked about. There's your rally, so you do recovery on the eligible units if they're eligible, so you can remove shaken, flip disrupted to shaken. There's even rules for French artillery getting their ammunition back. So again, the concept's easy, but it's just those little details you got to keep in your mind as you play so you get the full enjoyment out of the game. And the only reason why I'm not going to go into super detail on some of those aspects is because this video, I'm sure, after I splice it all together, is long enough. I'm sure it's going to be pretty long by the time I'm done talking to you. So let's wrap up then. Let's wrap up. Wow, I covered a lot. If anything is still unclear to you, please, leave a comment. Let somebody know. Maybe someone will let me know to explain something in detail. I wouldn't mind doing that. But I want to leave you with this thought. When I first started playing, and I know I mentioned this earlier, I thought this game was going to be a lot more complicated than what it actually is. If you just break it down to the basic components, you assemble your chit pool, draw your chit, activate the unit or the random event, complete your actions, which could be firing or moving, finish your actions with that unit, draw the next chit. Once everybody has done something and all those chits have been drawn, it's a new turn. Once you've gone through the appropriate number of turns, you then check for victory conditions. If you play like a long campaign, you're going to have more event chits to pull from. And if you do like that campaign, you might have the overnight phase, which has some rules. So if you're going to start out, don't let this game intimidate you. I don't know, maybe it hasn't. Maybe you find it just as easy as I do. Maybe you're on the fence. If you're on the fence, get it. It is really a good game. And I would be curious. I think they said there's like a system they have, and I forget what it's called, like the swords, blind swords chit pull system. So it makes me, I'm going to have to look on GMT website. I'm curious now if they actually have a game called Blind Swords or that's just the name of his system. But it gives you a fair amount of randomness to each turn that you play. I've never drawn the same event chits turn after turn. I don't think I ever have. Generally, I'll pick an opportunity fire chit because I want to make sure I have people that can shoot at people that move. Yeah, plus they have a rule. Oh, that's something else too. Let me throw that in there as a parting thought. One thing we didn't discuss is the fact that if you are moving, if you move adjacent to somebody, people can shoot at him. And let me tell you why this is really, really, really good. A lot of games I've played, you actually have to have an event card or a chit in order to defensive fire at people who move next to you. So in some games, you'll have a sacrificial unit move out, draw fire from those eligible units, and then they'll be spent. They won't be able to fire again that turn because they've taken that turn shooting. And then your opponent can then move up a whole bunch of people and no one can counterfire because they already counterfired at the sacrificial unit. In this game, if you move people up adjacent, they're going to get shot at. And I think that's great because I don't remember what's the time scale on this, but you got to remember it's not like 2 seconds, right? We're talking minutes because these are brigade movements. So during that time, these people are reloading. Their shooting might not be as accurate or whatever, however you want to narratively put it, but they're always loading their guns. they're never going to shoot once and then just sit there and say, yeah, come on, y'all, head on up the hill, get next to us, we're cool. No, they're constantly loading and shooting at people, and when they see people get close, so that's another thing that I liked about the game. It just makes sense, and I hope this gives you a little bit of insight into how well the game plays. I'm not the best at explaining rules, but I just want you to know, check this out for yourself, and you'll see as you play, it's a good experience. The thing is, it can take a while to play. The larger the scenario, the more units you have, the longer the chit pull system seems to take. All right, I have experimented with a little bit larger game. I went ahead and laid out a bunch of units, put all 11, put my 5 chits and the one that I selected, so I've got a draw bag like that's twice this size. It takes a while to resolve all the events and activate all your people. And one thing I saw another person do, here's a parting thought. Sometimes if you have a lot of people from a division, a lot of different brigades that you're working with, sometimes you might forget who fired and then who you're going to have move. And so I've actually seen people get little tokens and markers, and units that fire, they put, okay, that guy fired, that guy fired. Sure, he still has defensive fire when people come near him, but it's marked in such a way that I know, okay, he's not going to move because he fired. That's something that I didn't put together, but the more I play, even a small game, because I get pulled away sometimes and I kind of forget where I've left off, having little pegs or something to mark people as fired. I even thought about, I don't think I have it anymore. I had an old Battleship game and that's got white pegs and red pegs, and I don't think they would stand up very good, but find something and they'll roll around. But I need little cubes, maybe cubes from Settlers of Catan. I could mark units that have activated that way. But otherwise, I think it's a great game. The more people you have, obviously, the more units. It's going to take longer. What does this say for gameplay? Let me tell you if I agree. It says here, a map is 500 yards. A game turn is 1 hour. Yeah, see, that's why you can move people up and they're going to get shot at. 1 hour is a long time that's a lot of time to reload and watch people come at you. So I like that. But it does say complexity. No, I'm looking for a game length, like 1 hour, 2 hours. What do you say? Time, 1 hour per turn. Oh, that's game scale. Where's the actual game time? I don't see that on here. I was hoping this would say average game time is like 90 minutes to 2 hours. Yeah, I guess you can't say that because a short mission. Okay, so let me give you my opinion. I have not played a full campaign. I have not done a long. I've actually played the short short mission, that first one, a couple of times, and I'd say each time clocks in between 90 hour and a half to 2 hours if I'm not distracted. That's what I'm going to give it. I guess mostly because I'm slow. I don't know if that's slow or quick for some people. So I would say if you're going to play a much larger scenario, you might want to have a couple hours, definitely three or so hours set aside to get a nice big game gone through. Maybe that goes quicker. Obviously it goes quicker as you learn the game, because I still have to stop every once in a while and check a rule book, because remember, there's a lot of little rules sometimes that you could easily slip by and forget. But the basic mechanics, though, you could still play a decent game even if you forget an occasional little rule. I still say it's a thumbs up. Like, if I was rating system, 2 thumbs up. If I was going to give it on a scale of 1 to 5, that's tough, because if I look at it on mechanics, I think it's a 4. The map artwork is fantastic. I give the map a 5. Counters, I give a 3.5 to 4. They're not super exciting. They're not very big. The line artwork for the infantry, the horse, and the artillery are good, but that's purely judgmental by people what artwork they like. So as far as functionality, though, I give them a 4. They're great. They're fine. I can read the numbers. They're good. So, you know, overall I think it's a pretty good game. I know most games I end up rating like a 4 out of 5, so I don't go by my numbers, but what I'm telling you is it is a good game. I do not regret taking the time to learn this, which I will then make the disclaimer. In case you didn't watch the unboxing, GMT Games did send me this for this reason, to learn it, play it a bit, and then share my thoughts on it. And ultimately, this is worth keeping, and it is worth putting in your library. Now, would this be a game for a starter player? If you've never played a war game before, maybe you would want to look for something with, let's see here. Like, they have a scale of complexity. Yeah, I'm going to agree. This is right around here. It's not as bad as I thought it was. It really is easy to pick up the basics and then just add in those little details as you play. But if you've never played war games before, you might want to wait and look for something that's in this low complexity. But ultimately, if you didn't find anything that you like, you could start with this, I think. Solitaire playability, I agree. It's up here in a little bit of the medium. What makes this a good solitaire game is the fact that you've got this nice random activation chit system, right? So that's half the fun right there. There's not a whole lot of, I'd say, fog of war. The fog of war is in the chit pull system, and it produces a lot of chaos. It's almost like Herman Luttman and Chad Jensen are like really super good friends, and they both came up with systems that give a lot of randomness and things that could cause good or bad on your side of the battlefield. So I'd say for solitaire suitability, yeah, it is. It's really good for solitaire. Down here would mean not very solitaire friendly. Up here in the high medium, yeah, I agree. It's a two-player game, but does really well for solo. This here on the high end, that's more for games that are purely designed for solo. For a two-player game, yeah, I agree. My son won't touch this one. He's not interested. So I play this by myself all the time. That's why I never lose. But that's about it. If you've watched this, hey, kudos to you. It's one of the longer videos I've done, but hopefully you've made it to the end. If you've made it to the end, I have a code word for you, and that is cuckoo kachoo. So if you've watched this to the end, or maybe skipped, and you have cuckoo kachoo, you could type that in the comments and nothing will happen. Alright, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.